Hey everyone, today I want to talk about 9 bad habits to break as a bow hunter. The first bad habit on the list is becoming a hoarder of bow hunting equipment, especially when there's other equipment or needs out there that we need for our bow hunting season. And what I mean by that is I look at bow hunting in some ways in a business sense, if that makes sense, and that a lot of the equipment that I have are assets to me getting a buck for the fall. And you know what? If I don't have all of my tree stands out, or I don't have all of my trail cameras out because either I didn't have the time or maybe I lost a property, whatever it might be, that's unused equipment just sitting there doing absolutely nothing when it could be out in the deer woods doing something for you. And same with even camo. You know, over time you change out your camo and you get different boots and different backpacks, so on and so forth. And all that stuff just sits there. You know, and then you're thinking about maybe purchasing that new bow or upgrading that bow or upgrading a tree stand or maybe having a little extra money to go on a hunting trip somewhere. You know, that's the time to take your equipment, that extra equipment that you know that you're not going to utilize, and put it on Facebook Marketplace, put it on Craigslist, sell it, and then utilize those funds to get the equipment that you do need. And you know what? There's a lot of young hunters out there too, or people that are just trying to get into bow hunting. If you get the stuff laying around and doesn't have much value, give it to them. They'd be more than happy to utilize it. And you know what? You might make a new bow hunting friend along the way. Number 2 is not getting to your stand early enough. A few years ago when I started self-filming my bow hunts, and any of you that self-film know this as well, that there's just so much more prep time that you need to account for than when you weren't self-filming. And that has to make sure that your batteries are fully charged, your equipment in your backpack is exactly where you want it, exactly what you need. Sometimes you're changing out different batteries, different cameras. And then once you get to the stand, you know, and you're all locked up into your stand with your safety harness, you know, you just can't bow hunt right away. You got to make sure that, in my case anyways, my GoPro is above my head, my big camera's off to the side, the camera arm is where I want it, making sure that I open up the camera door. Everything is good, and that takes time. And you know what? And even if you're not a self-filmer, there's times where you get into the woods, you know, and you find out, especially if you're hunting public land, there's somebody in a, you know, area that you want to bow hunt, or private land. I've gotten to places where it's private land, and no more than I get out there 100 yards from the, you know, the field edge where I'm set up in the woods, the farmers go out there disking or baling hay or whatever it might be, and I want to make a little bit of a change, and it gives me that time to do that. A lot of times, especially in early season, you know, those evenings, they tend to really die down at night. And if you think about it, a lot of times the wind covers your sound and in some ways your sight, because leaves are moving all over. And that gives you that opportunity to get closer to a buck's bed to set up, where if you come in a little bit later, you know, that wind might die down 4 or 5 miles per hour, and it might be just enough that that little stick that you step on makes that cracking sound, and that big buck that's about 100 yards over, he hears that just because it's less windy than if you'd have came in maybe a half hour or even an hour before. The next bad habit is being ungrateful, and you see this on social media all the time. The individual shows his buck out there and he puts, "Not my biggest buck, but..." Nobody really cares, to be honest with you. Even the bucks I shoot, most people don't care. They're just happy that you got a buck that you're happy with, and that you're happy is what they more or less care about. You know, and people like, don't get me wrong, they like to see big deer, so on and so forth. Sometimes they just want to know where you got it, what county, whatever the case might be. And actually that's more of their interest than the buck that you actually harvested. But the one thing that they do notice is you being ungrateful for it. And if you think about it, that buck sacrificed his life to put food on your table, for your family, for yourself, for your friends, and you're downgrading it really in front of everybody. Be proud of every buck that you took. You know, in a lot of cases, you know, when I shoot a buck, it's what kind of hunt did that buck give me? You know, if it's a buck that I've been chasing all year long and it is, we'll call it maybe a smaller buck that I'm used to taking, you know what? In a lot of cases, I am more grateful for that hunt than any huge buck that I might have shot opening night that came out and gave me an easy 10-yard shot. Or another type of buck that I'm very grateful for is, was it the last buck that you shot with your grandfather, your dad, your son, your daughter? And it might be a forker, it might be a 6, it might be a spike, whatever it might be. Those to me are the bucks that I consider the most grateful for. And nobody ever will know that, but it shouldn't be about what everybody thinks about your deer that you get. It should be about the buck, the deer that makes you the most happy. You know what? And just be grateful. Be grateful to even hunt, because there's some people that can't even do that anymore. Another one, and you probably saw this one coming, but is to shoot that bow year round. And you know, as a personal trainer, it's one thing to keep those muscles up to par, so that way you don't pull that bow out a month before season and you pull a muscle and you're trying to recover in time to be able to go bow hunting because you have back spasms, or maybe you tore a labrum or a rotator cuff, whatever it might be. Shoot that bow year round if you can. And then the other thing is, and I think anybody who's ever worked in an archery shop can attain to this, but is a lot of times when things go wrong, they go wrong when people pull those bows out in July and August. And then you have this influx of people coming into the shop with their equipment. And I was like, please get this fixed. Opening a bow hunting is just around the corner, and you may or may not get your bow back in time. If stuff like this starts to go wrong in January, February, March, take it in. You have plenty of time that, you know, they can work on your equipment. Or if you work on your own equipment, it gives you enough time. The next bad habit that you need to break as a bow hunter is only doing your scouting essentially in summer or towards the end of summer. Now, I scout all year round, don't get me wrong, and summer takes a part of that, but my scouting is different. I am not going in as far, and it's a lot of times on those outer edges that I'm scouting. Now, in January, February, March, that's the time to really dive in, get in there, and see what those deer were doing. And maybe you were after a particular buck. Now's the time to see what was he doing, why was he going certain directions. And the other thing is, all the leaves are off, you can start to see the rubs more, you can start to see some of the bedding areas actually even more. And then you can see those heavier trails that these deer are utilizing to go from their bedding to their food source. And with the snow and the mud and creating that melt, sometimes you can see those bigger buck tracks, because, you know, in February, March, every deer is bald for the most part. You can start to see where those big bucks might be going or heading to, and find out where those, once again, buck beds are. You get that scouting done in that January, February, March, April time frame, and then I like to literally let it sit all the way till bow season starts if I can, and then I'll scout once again those outer edges of those bedding areas if I need to pick up where deer are coming out to a field, maybe move a few cameras around or set up a few cameras. But the key with that is make sure that you aren't just scouting in summer. Put most of your scouting in that early season, or essentially early of the year, I should say, when it's still snow, and January, February, March. The next bad habit that I think people need to break is becoming camera geeks or relying on the cameras too much. I've literally had bucks spot a camera one time and then literally go behind that tree or 50, 60 yards away from that camera every single time. And what catches people off guard is that they'll see smaller bucks and the doe families walk in front of that camera over and over and over. And to them, it's like giving them that validation that their camera is not spooking them. But you get that one big buck that knows what the game is all about. He spots that camera and he's never going to show himself again. And they give you this false sense that that big boy is not in the area. So once again, be careful of relying on the cameras too much. And then I think some people too, what they do is they put these cameras on trails, specific trails, and you know, they try to pattern a particular buck. And if there's one thing I've learned over the years is the bigger the buck, they don't pattern really too easy. They make sure that they keep their patterns actually irregular. Matter of fact, one little thing that cameras actually have shown me is that a buck, a bigger buck, when he comes out to a particular field, very seldom will he ever go back into that same hole of the woods or same path that he came out of. And that's a simple survival method if you think about it. They know that predators follow their scent trails out, and why would you go back into that same scent trail? So once again, make sure that you're not relying on those trail cameras too much. They are a tool. I utilize them as well, but sometimes we put a little bit too much stock into the trail camera, you know, and sometimes we don't realize that there is a big buck on our property that we hunt, but we don't think there is just because we didn't see him on trail camera. The next bad habit, and I think this is kind of a given, is over pressuring a property. You know, I see these folks out there who buy a new property for bow hunting, and you know, they put the food plots in and everything, and that's great, but they always want to keep checking on things. They want to see how the apple trees are doing. They want to see how their food plot is coming up, and then they're going and they're pulling those cards and checking those cards on their trail cameras, you know, once a week. And a lot of times that just becomes way too much pressure on a particular property. Now, public land, that is a little bit of a different beast. You know, if I put a trail camera out there, I let that trail camera usually soak for 4 to 5 months before I'll go back and check a SD card back there. But when it comes to your properties, whether you own the property or in my case, a lot of knock-on-door permission properties, you know, I get my scouting done earlier in the season, get those stands hung, and I am done usually by April, and I don't ever want to go back onto that property until opening day of bow season. I want to let it sit and rest as much as possible. This habit to me is more of a, we'll call it a bad habit if you over obsess about it. And that is focusing too much on FOC. You know, you see it all the time. Guys are worrying about their broadhead, their weight of their arrow, putting in the inserts, whether or not they have too much weight, this and that. You know what? We never did that when we were younger. Matter of fact, I remember bow hunting with a few guys. They'd show up and in their quiver, they'd have different looking arrows in that quiver, and you know, they shot a big buck every year. The key to me is that make sure that your bow is paper tuned and that those arrows are flying like darts. And you know what? As long as that bow is putting those arrows right where they need to be consistently, shot after shot, and those arrows aren't too light, I think you're totally fine. And once again, get out there, shoot, hunt, and quit worrying about some of those intangibles. And I hate to say it, but I think a lot of those guys too, you know, that worry about FOC and all these little intangibles, like I said earlier in regards to the bow, sometimes those are the first guys out there to blame the bow or their arrow setup for when they don't harvest that buck or they wound that deer and they're not able to recover it. And a lot of times it's user error. They just don't want to admit it. So quit getting into that overconsumption OCD of worrying about FOC. The last bad habit to break, and I am guilty of this as well, but you know, I have a YouTube channel. I do like to show people that I hunt a little bit, but that's showing off those trail camera pics and those bucks that you have on your property. And what ends up happening is when you start showing those trail camera pictures of those bucks that you have out there, you know, there's a lot of people that you don't realize that follow you, or they know that buck is in the area, and you're just using, you know, your pictures out there like, oh, yep, I know that he hunts right here. He's got that buck coming in at, let's say, an hour after dark. Well, I know which way he's headed just based on the background. I can maybe get that buck because I hunt the property next to him, whatever it might be, you know. And it's up to you. I mean, you can, you know, maybe you have a property that's a bigger property, and you want to showcase those bucks for whatever reason. But for me, I keep that fairly quiet, you know, and I've showcased some bucks on here on my YouTube channel, but it's tough for me because, you know, there are some bucks out there that just have a particular characteristic to them. And if I show them, the people who may or may not know where I hunt, they may be after him. If you folks found this episode helpful and you got value from it, please hit that subscribe button. I greatly appreciate it. So I have to continue working on the YouTube studio. I'm actually just in the corner right now. I've been working on the walls here. I'll be putting up all of my deer heads and fish and the whole 9 yards. So I got to go do that right now. And hopefully in one of the future episodes, you can see the YouTube studio all said and done. And I'm actually really looking forward to showing that off to you folks. But because I put a lot of work into this. So until next time, Clint from Oak and Iron Outdoors.